They have been in power for almost 5 months. During this time, a lot of statements were made, a lot of appointments were made. Some of these appointments have already ended with a review, dismissal, and so on. How do you see Russia's relationship with the new Trump administration? Where are we and where is all this going?
I think we are already in a more correct position, in a more normal position than it was in relation to the Biden administration, which, after, to be honest, a reassuring Putin-Biden summit in June 2021 in Geneva, unfortunately did not unfold at 360 degrees, as Annalena Baerbock advised everyone to do, but at 180 and blocked all channels of communication. It was a good meeting in Geneva. I probably do not give any secrets, but in the initial part, when there was a narrow composition in June 2021, Joe Biden, without looking into the details, said that the United States and Russia are two great powers. Each power has its own history. We must respect each other's history and the history of any other country. It is well known that the United States was formed as a melting pot, where all migrants plunged and came out of this melting pot, as he put it, with the inscription, "Human Rights" on the forehead. And we are all Americans. Your empire, he continued, developed differently, and, in general, attached territories to itself, where settled peoples lived for many centuries. And you did not let them into any melting pots. You respected all their traditions, read their history, culture, religion, and even the Russian Empire had such a practice of providing different statuses to its component parts, to respect and take into account the very diversity. And that is why President Biden continued in June 2021. This is a completely different state education, civilized in the most diverse senses of the word. And we, he said to President Putin, do not want anyone to undermine this monolithic unity. You had to do a lot after coming to the post of president in 2000. And the country has strengthened. It seems to us very useful, because with a nuclear bomb, first of all, it is reliable when you control it. And now I have almost listed everything close to the text. And when President Lula, the Brazilian president, recently said that Biden, while still at work in the White House, and met with Lula and said that it was necessary to destroy Russia, then his main concern was that Russia would not lose the ability to control its military power. And here the main thing was just to destroy Russia, as far as President Lula can be understood. And then there was a break. Yes, Bill Burns, the director of the CIA, came and tried to dissuade us from the fact that, as they thought, it was already an unspoken decision to attack Ukraine, as they put it. We told them that our concern was not to attack someone, but to protect our legal interests and security. And then was presented, you remember, the project of the Russian-NATO agreement and the project of the Russian-US treaty, in which, in these two documents, our interests were clearly outlined. The interests of Russia's security are not at the expense of the security of our neighbors. A couple of meetings took place on one document. On another document, on both documents, we met in January with the then Secretary of State in Geneva. We were actually ignored, and the tasks that were set out, which we are now solving as part of a special military operation, were called unacceptable. There are no guarantees that Ukraine will not join NATO, even to think about it. Forget about it. Then the Secretary of State Blinken told me, he said, we are creating ground missiles of medium and short range, a class that was prohibited by the RSMD agreement, from which the United States came out and have not responded, and still have not responded. It is already clear that they will not respond to our call, and in the absence of an agreement, to make two parallel, not interconnected, moratoriums. And Blinken says, let's agree that in Ukraine we will place such ground missiles of medium and short range, well, in a certain number, no more. Well, and you, next to the Ukrainian border, will also take on such an obligation to provide a ceiling. That's all. And when a week later, I think, already speaking in the same Davos or Munich, Zelensky hysterically shouted that no one would forbid Ukraine to join NATO, he was applauded. When a week later, the shelling, the most severe violation of the Minsk agreements, the shelling of Donbass, increased 10 to 15 times, when it was already ready to implement Plan B, that is, not through the Minsk agreements to end this war, but through the seizure, violent seizure of those, in general, small territories, very small territories of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, which were not under the control of Kiev. We had no choice but to do so. A last one. I know that I only have 5 minutes to answer each question, but the last thing I want to say, and what characterizes, in my opinion, the current administration, we should never give in to illusions. When we met with Marco Rubio in in February, at the end of February, they, as the initiators of the meeting, the Americans, began the conversation, and Marco said the following. The foreign policy of President Trump, our administration, is strongly based on national interests, which we talked about here a little earlier today. We recognize that other countries also have national interests, especially when it comes to the great powers such as the United States and the Russian Federation. Therefore, so that there are no surprises, so that there are no misunderstandings, we assume that in most cases the interests of large countries will not coincide. But when national interests of countries such as Russia and the United States coincide, it will not be a crime, but it will be a colossal mistake not to use this coincidence in order to implement mutually beneficial projects in the material sphere, whether it is economics, energy, transport, space, the Arctic, whatever. And secondly, but in most cases, when these interests do not coincide, the duty of the great powers is not to allow this mismatch to degrade into confrontation, especially hot. I support this approach with both hands, and the president has always been based on this when formulating his foreign policy. We are ready to talk to everyone, honestly, without acting on our national root legal interests and without demanding this from our partners. You can always reach an agreement. A balance of interests, compromises, these are words that President Putin has said many times, answering the question of how it is with whom to agree. Therefore, I would not be arrogant. We do not know how the situation inside the Trump administration will unfold. I believe that the relations that were established between the presidents during the first term of Donald Trump are working. They do not need any preludes, preface. They immediately, during their regular phone contacts, immediately proceed to the point. And it seems to me that this is how it should work. It is always better to express your position directly. Then there will be no illusions and unfulfilled hopes. Of course, it seems to me that President Trump, his Secretary of State, his Vice President, these are the policies that want to work this way.